Hi everyone, today we're looking at chapter 3, Norman England 1066 to 88. So this is the last of the chapters in Anglo-Saxon and Norman, and the links and revision guides and everything you need for this can be found in the comments section underneath if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're not, if you go to the Pilton History Department Instagram, you'll be able to get the links from there. So firstly, let's look at the feudal system introduced by William. It is a system of holding land, and it looks at the duties and the obligations that come with it. William gives land to his tenants-in-chief, but they've got to give him something in return. Troops, and any land with this obligation is called a fief, or a feud, hence feudal system. Some landowners also had to provide knights, and knight service was for 40 days. It was unpaid. The baron, the tenant-in-chief, had to give money, weapons, and equipment for them. Basically, it means William gets an army that he does not have to pay for. He gets it in return for lending land to the barons. So there you have it. William's at the top. He gives land and keeps the peace. Tenants-in-chief, they give land and other privileges to the knights, and they give land to be worked on by the peasants. In return, the peasants do service for the lord and pay rent. The undertenants, the knights, they will do military service for the barons, the tenants-in-chief, and the tenants-in-chief will provide soldiers for the army and also provide taxes and money for William. So the king's the most powerful person. Tenants-in-chief, so they hold their fiefs, their land, directly from the king. They were very important people. Barons, some were church leaders, and they've got important roles. So these are the jobs of the tenants-in-chief. You might want to compare it to the earls from Anglo-Saxon times. Military, they fought with, put down any rebels. Social, they provided knights for the king. They organized transferring land holding from the Saxons to the Normans. So in other words, they took the land away from the Saxons. They provided courts in each barony. So in other words, they were going to give the justice, they were going to uphold the law. Political, they give advice to the king and also somewhere for the king to stay when he was traveling around the country. And the economy, they gave the king a share of their revenue earned in their fief. They also keep a share for themselves. So it's a way of William making money. Knight service. There were 6,000 knights in Norman England. Their job was to guard the lord's property, defeat any threats, and provide 40 days knight service when they're needed. They're superior soldiers. They used cavalry charges and lances against their enemies. The knights replaced the thanes as under-tenants. They dealt with minor court cases in manorial court. So the thanes were got rid of because they're Anglo-Saxons. They're replaced with Norman knights, another way of keeping control. Landholding. So under William, if a landholder dies, they do not automatically give it to an heir. William will decide if they inherit it or not, and they've got to prove their loyalty to William. They've got to pay him something called a relief. William could use this to control people. If you've been a good person and served William well, then you're going to pay a low relief. If you haven't, you're going to pay a high one. Or if you've been a complete pain, he can take the land away from you. It makes people loyal to William. Homage. Everybody has to go through a ceremony and pay homage to William, promising on the Bible to be loyal to him. Labour service. These are things that peasants did in return for using the land. It was basically farming for the lord or ploughing his fields. Forfeiture. This is a way that William keeps control. If you don't do as you're told, if you don't do as you promise you will forfeit your land. It will be taken away from you. The church, this is really important. I've got a funny feeling that there will be a question somewhere on the church, so I really want you to know about the Norman church. So what is the church? What does it do? Well, it's a huge landowner for a start. It keeps all the documents that the judges need. It does military service. People like Odo are warrior clerics, so they'll fight for the king. They give advice to the king. They issue royal writs. If the lord, or the king rather, wants to give out a law, it will be the church that writes it down and gets it out there. They acted as the king's representative. So there you've got it on the right-hand side, why the church is so important. Don't forget as well, if William controls the church, he controls even more people because they listen to what the church says, and he can tell them what to say to people. The role of the church, there you have it. Basically, just what we had on the previous slide, but bigger so you can pause and take notes if you need to. Normanization, very important. I think there could well be a question asking you about a feature of normanization or some sort of explanation question. So this is what it is. Under William, the English church went through a process of Normanization. It means that it becomes more Norman in the way it looks and in the way it's run. All the Anglo-Saxon churches and cathedrals were destroyed and rebuilt in the Norman style. Massive, impressive buildings with huge rounded arches. So that would be a good feature of one. Changes were not just physical. William replaced every Anglo-Saxon bishop with a Norman. Churches were made to follow Norman church procedures. So that's what Normanization is. You make the whole of the church system and buildings Norman. How does it help William then? How does it strengthen his power? The church has a quarter of the land in England. Notice I don't say owns a quarter of the land because, of course, all land is owned by William. The Norman bishops were loyal, meaning rebellions were less likely. They gave out positive messages about the king and how God had favoured the Normans, very useful for control. Important church decisions were agreed by William. When a bishop died, William chose who took over. Usually church leaders were loyal to the Pope, but William made it clear that he was in charge. The bishops served him, not the Pope. The reforms introduced by Archbishop Lanfranc brought in strict rules for parish priests, many of whom were still Anglo-Saxons. I really want you to know the name Lanfranc, the new Norman Archbishop, and the name Stigand, his predecessor, an Anglo-Saxon, the difference between them, and what these new reforms were. I've got a feeling that could be useful. Normanization of the church strengthened William's power in three ways. So this is just me summarizing what we just said. You can pause on it if you need to do some notes. Lanfranc, here he is. In 1070, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stigand, was replaced by a Norman called Lanfranc. He was a very well-known monk who had run monasteries for William before. So look at the difference between them. Really want you to know this. Stigand had been appointed by Edward the Confessor because of his connections to Earl Godwin. So Stigand was put in place because of the power of the Godwins. He was somebody that would do what the Godwins wanted. Lanfranc believed that appointments should be decided by people in the church. Stigand only controlled the church in his area, so he didn't control the whole of the church in England. Lanfranc controls the church in the whole of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury, which Lanfranc was, is still the head of the church today. Stigand, like many bishops, was corrupt, so he just did it to make money. He was a pluralist, so plural, clues in the title. It means that he's got two areas to control, Canterbury and Winchester. It means he gets more land, he gets more money. So he's doing more than one job. Well, he's not doing more than one job. He's claiming money for more than one job. He's probably not doing either that well. He was accused of giving people jobs in return for bribes. Lanfranc believed the church should stand above this kind of corruption. So Lanfranc believes the church must be pure. It should not be corrupt. Lanfranc's reforms, this is what he did. He wanted priests to lead spiritual lives. He banned them from marrying or having sex. It was a major change. So the Anglo-Saxon priests lived in their community and had families. So remember, big change. He created more monasteries dedicated to a holy way of life. He made special church-only courts, meaning that clergymen were tried separately from the usual 100 court. They were usually a bit softer than the king's courts as well, so they weren't quite as harsh if the clergy did something wrong. He brought in more archdeacons, kind of vice bishops, if you like, just above the priests. Their job was to manage the priests' enforced church discipline. So they knew that there weren't enough bishops to make sure that everything was done the way he wanted, so they bring in these archdeacons to make sure everybody, every priest is behaving themselves. Saxon cathedrals were knocked down, rebuilt in larger towns. It meant that the bishop was in a more secure location. He's in a town surrounded by Normans where he couldn't be attacked. He brought in changes to church rituals. He used his own collection of legal documents to develop new laws. So basically, it's about making the church much more Norman and controlling it more tightly and making sure that it was a lot more pure, if you like, no corruption. You've got a little diagram there that shows you how the church was organized under Lanfranc. Worth revising. Changes to government. So the Anglo-Saxon government was very advanced. It was more advanced than what William had in Normandy. So he was going to keep what worked, but he did make some changes. He centralized power, so he had total control. When you centralize power, it means that you control everything yourself. So he's not relying on people in the earldoms or anything like that to run things for him. He's telling them exactly what he wants. He owns all the land. No one is powerful enough to challenge him. The power of the earls was reduced. Some earldoms were phased out completely. He made the earldoms smaller. He made them less wealthy. They were easy to take on if they dared to rebel against him. He also used regents. If he was out of the country, he would use someone to run England when he was away and get in touch with him if there was any trouble. He used people he trusted, like Lanfranc. He also used Odo, but more of that later. How does he centralize power? This is well worth knowing. Could be a question. Explain how power was centralized. Knight service. His troops, his knights are loyal to him, not the Lord. The church was Normanized, and it was giving out the message that William was good, William was great, you must be loyal to William. All land was owned by William, so he could punish people by taking it away if they did something naughty. Domain. This was royal land kept just for himself to show how powerful he was. William earned money through reliefs and the gell tax. Reliefs, people paid money to inherit land, or the gell tax was just a pretty heavy tax. He loved money, by the way. The Domesday Book. This recorded how much areas were worth and how much they should pay. It was a way of him knowing exactly what people owned, what they could afford to give him, so he could squeeze more out of them. The feudal system. All land users depended on the king. He set up the feudal system, which basically meant you were loyal to the king. You depended on the king. It's a great way of controlling. Sheriffs used to be called a shirif, pretty similar to what they were like in Anglo-Saxon times, but he just replaced them with Normans. So there's your key difference. They were replaced with Normans. Other key difference is that Norman sheriffs were much more powerful. They answered only to the king, so they didn't have to take any orders from earls or anything. Some of the sheriff's legal responsibilities were taken over by manorial or church courts, so they didn't have to do everything they used to have to do before. Defense. The sheriff's military role now ran alongside knight service. The sheriffs looked after castles in their shire. So they were kind of really important. Often earls became sheriffs. That's how powerful they were now. The earls that weren't sheriffs were kind of resentful. They were a bit grumpy that these sheriffs had so much power. Sheriffs could keep some of the money that they collected. They could become very rich. This meant, of course, that they'd try and squeeze as much money out of people as possible, so they weren't very popular. They also did a lot of land grabbing. Because of their power, you couldn't complain about it, and they'd steal lots of land. The forest. William loved hunting. He kept much more land as royal domain than Edward did. The domain was the land that the king kept for his own use. He made new areas into forest. It was not necessarily covered in trees. It meant it was protected land reserved for hunting. So lots of land was taken down, destroyed, got rid of. Entire areas were turned into forest, like the New Forest in the southern part of England, and it meant destroying Anglo-Saxon homes to do it. Reasons why it was so significant. It showed how powerful the king was. He could make this just for him. Extending the forest increased the amount of land that he controlled. Taking areas of forest was basically land grabbing. So when William did it, it made it more acceptable. So it encouraged the sheriffs and barons to do it too. There were harsh punishments for breaking forest laws that showed how brutal the Normans could be. William earned money from the forests, from fines and the sale of hunting rights. So under the forest law, animals were protected, especially William's favourites. Apart from him, he could go hunt them. Hunting weapons were not allowed in the forest. Hunting dogs were not allowed. Damage to the vegetation needed by the animals was forbidden. Restrictions on cutting down wood, buildings, clearing land in the forest. It basically means that if you're a peasant, you can't go and hunt for food, even if you're hungry. You can't go and collect firewood, even if you need it to stay warm. Otherwise, you're punished, have your hand chopped off, be blinded, that sort of thing. So the peasants were really angry about this because they thought that William was keeping this land just for his own fun when they were starving. Domesday Book. William ordered a survey of England. He wanted to find out who held what land, which meant he could work out what taxes they owed, whether they could pay more. The results of the survey were written up in the Domesday Book in 1086. The Domesday Book has three significances, really worth remembering this if you're asked. Financial, money. William wanted to find ways to get more money out of his tenants. There were heavy geld taxes in 1084 and 1086. Secondly, legal. The dispute that could happen between Anglo-Saxons and Normans or whatever, you could use the Domesday Book to settle it. So, for example, if the Normans had done any land grabs, you can refer to the Domesday Book to prove that you owned it. It shows that William was a fair king. If two people were arguing about land, right, William would look in the Domesday Book and work out who really owned it, who was trying to steal it. Military. There was an invasion threat from Denmark in 1085. It's always the Danes. Though it never happened. The Domesday Survey may have been linked to seeing how many soldiers each tenant could provide. So the Domesday Book, you could find out how many men you could call into your army from a certain area. You could also find out who had enough space to shelter an army and look after an army while they were waiting to fight. So there are three big significances of the Domesday Book. The council that met to discuss the Domesday Survey was called mainly to discuss a possible Viking attack. It never happened, but William took it seriously. He brought thousands of soldiers over from Normandy, and he used the Domesday Book to find out where they could stay, who had the room. Norman aristocracy. The Norman aristocrats, the nobles, the important people, they liked to show off their power, their wealth, and their superiority over the English. So how do they do it? They build experimental cathedrals and churches and castles with huge halls. Tower of London was the largest stone keep in Europe. Lots of aristocrats did like a skin fade kind of thing. They shaved the back of their heads. If you spent time on your appearance, it showed you were rich. It was a luxury that few could afford. It's a terrible looking haircut. Not skin fade, that's all right, but that dude there, not sure. They introduced a complicated ceremonial method of butchering animals they hunted. So it's some kind of show-offy way of cutting up these animals. It was a leisure activity, and it showed they had time to do this because they were so rich. They brought the culture of chivalry, like a moral code. You look up to knights, you treat your enemies in a certain way. William was merciful to enemies, putting them in prison rather than killing them, sometimes. They were very religious, they believed in penance. So if they killed, then they had to make up for it. Every soldier that fought at Hastings had to atone for their sins by praying or giving money to the church. Each man they wounded was 40 days' penance. The Normans threw out many Anglo-Saxon saints' relics and destroyed their tombs. They thought they were superior to the English that they had conquered, so they got rid of all their relics. They introduced family names based on where they lived. They liked to pass estates on to a single heir rather than giving pieces to different family members. So they became from that place. So if, for example, you lived on the Gower, which is a lovely place in South Wales, then your family name would be Gower, and you'd pass on your land and the name. Language. William tried to learn English, but he gave up because he didn't have time. Lanfranc also couldn't speak English when he was appointed archbishop. All legal and church documents were in Latin. The Norman aristocracy spoke French through though their children would probably speak both French and English. Many Normans didn't bother learning to read. Youngsters were often whipped when witnessing land grants to make sure they remembered the details. That's an interesting way of revising, but I don't think I'll try it. English became a vernacular language. It was only spoken by the common people. So English was just a language of the lower classes. Everyone spoke French. Odo. Bishop Odo was William's half-brother. He was Bishop of Bayeux, and Odo helped William in his invasion of England. He was rewarded with the earldom of Kent, which was forfeited by Leofwine Godwinson. He became the second largest landowner after the king. He was co-regent of England along with William Fitz-Osborne while William was away in 1067. He was also a nightmare. Odo got into trouble with William due to his corrupt behaviour. He seems to have had ambitions for power. If you read the Domesday Book, and I don't suggest you do, there are better things to do, passing your time, but if you do, it records many complaints against Odo for illegally taking land grabs, including from the church. Lanfranc complained to William. Odo was made to give it back, which was embarrassing for him. William sent Odo to deal with trouble in Northumberland in 1079. While he was there, he damaged the region, robbed people, and took treasures from the cathedrals. Nice. Odo tried to take some of William's knights with him on a trip to Rome. Some people say this was because Odo wanted to become pope. Now, this is where centralization becomes really important, because William says those knights are not yours. All knights belong to the king. By taking them out of the country, you are breaking the law. He ends up in prison for it. There you go. He was only persuaded to release him on his deathbed. He had freed other prisoners like Morcar with much less persuasion. So Morcar's rebelled against him loads of times, and he still lets him out of prison before his own brother. William and his sons. What type of man was William? He loved money. He wanted to own everything. He tried to get more revenue out of his land. A husband. He was a devoted husband to his wife Matilda. He wept for days when she died in 1083. He was strong. He survived several assassination attempts when he was younger. By 1066, he had 10 years fighting experience. He was religious, a man of God. He promoted the church reforms. He supposedly repented his sins on his deathbed, including the harrying of the north. Talking of which, he was brutal. He put down rebellions harshly, the harrying of the north. He put his own half-brother in prison. His son, Robert. This was a question in 2024. William's eldest child was Robert. He was given the mocking nickname Robert Curthose, which means short stockings or dumpy legs. They had a difficult relationship. Robert started a fight with two of his younger brothers after they played a prank on him. He felt that William didn't punish them enough and tried to take control of his castle. William wanted Robert and his supporters arrested. Robert fled, was taken in by King Philip of France. He was given a castle and some men by Philip and started to raid Normandy. So most people, when they fall out with their dad, they go and sulk in their room. Not Robert. He gets an army and attacks him. Unknown to William, Matilda was sending money to Robert. She explained to William she was looking after her son. In 1079, they came face to face in battle, and Robert knocked William off his horse. So Robert is pretty decent at the old fighting. Robert gave his defenseless father his own horse and ordered him to retreat. William was humiliated. This is what an example of that chivalry thing we were talking about earlier, the rules of warfare. William and Robert made up at Easter in 1080, a reunion organised by Matilda. Robert was once again the chosen heir for Normandy. So the problem here is the fact that princes are often wanting power before their fathers are ready to let go of it. And that was what the argument was over. William's death. People thought his death was full of bad omens. When he died, his panicked servants stole everything they could, leaving his stripped corpse on the floor. And this is gross. At his funeral, his fat corpse burst when it was being squeezed into the tomb. It caused a horrible smell which drove everyone out of the cathedral. So people were saying, well, it's because he was so nasty and horrible and he did things like the harrying of the north. William had said Robert should inherit Normandy and William Rufus, his favourite son, should inherit England. He was filled with guilt for his sins on his deathbed and said he would let God choose the next king of England. Nice one, William, because it's never caused a problem before, is it? Like 1066. William was injured in July of 1087 when he was thrown from his horse during a raid in France. He suffered in pain for weeks before he died on the 9th of September. William Rufus versus Robert and Odo. Lanfranc crowned William Rufus, King William II, in September 1087, but Odo, released from prison, started a rebellion in 1088. Odo and many barons thought it made more sense for the same person, Robert Curthose, to be in charge of England and Normandy. Also, Odo reckons that even though Robert is a really good warrior, he is easily controllable as a leader, so they think they can probably get more money out of him and they can make him do what they want. William Rufus is more like his dad. He wouldn't be having any of that, so they don't fancy it. Odo was joined by his brother Robert of Mortain. It's another Robert. So when it says William and Robert rebel against William, it is not Robert Dumpy Legs. Other smaller rebellions also broke out in places like Norwich, Leicester, and the Marcher earldoms. Most Norman aristocrats, most of the English population were against the revolt. William Rufus caught both Odo and Robert at Pevensey Castle using local furred troops, so he catches his uncles. Odo escapes to Rochester Castle, but eventually surrenders after Robert Curthose didn't come to support him, so he doesn't get involved in the revolt. William was popular after Odo's defeat and made lots of promises to overturn many of the hated parts of Norman rule. High taxes, the forests, but he went back on all of them. So a summary then. The Anglo-Saxon social system was replaced by William's feudal system. The church was reformed and Normanised under Archbishop Lanfranc. You've got to know what Normanised is, you've got to know what Lanfranc did. He kept Anglo-Saxon elements, but centralised power, so he was the most powerful. What is centralisation? Be able to give examples of what it is. The authority of the sheriff and the shire reeve was strengthened. Be able to tell me how. The Domesday Book recorded details of tenants and landholders that helped William maintain his control of the country. Know the three things the Domesday Book is important for, is significant for. So things like the military, things like money, and things like the law. Anglo-Saxon aristocratic culture was replaced by Norman aristocratic culture. So know that they spoke French. Know that English was just a local language. Know that the Normans looked down on the English. When they went to the toilet, they called it doing in English. Lovely. Odo, William's half-brother, was untouchable until he began to challenge William's power. Then he ended up in jail. William's strong personality influenced the success of the Norman conquest, but caused tension with his sons, one of whom, Robert, rebelled against him. After William died in 1087, there was a dispute over who should succeed him. His son, William Rufus, successfully defeated a rebellion by Odo and was supported by most of the population. Now, the thing to do after this is to look at the section underneath the video where I've done the description of it. I've put lots of links in there, and these links will take you to great revision materials you need to be ready for this part of the exam. What I would do is download the bit where it says revision lessons and sheets, because you can fill in those sheets as you watch this video back, and it'll help you have a really, really good revision thingy. There's also going to be a timeline there that tells you the story in order. And as well as that, you've got Knowledge Organiser, and you've got a quiz and some flashcards. Really is possible for you to do brilliantly on this exam just by looking at what you've got on this page and what you've got underneath. Don't forget, there are 3 chapters in this section. This is the 3rd. There are 2 other videos on YouTube that you can use as well. Don't forget the Instagram account where you can get to Linktree and find a lot of other resources as well. Okay, hope this was useful to you, and I will see you all soon.